kind of review in his mind what's coming.
When it starts to review or introduce.
It's already recording. He can go ahead and start.
I thought I stopped the recording. Okay, this is Rabbi Alton Goldman Synagogue speaking. You can't see me, but you can hear me. And I want to thank Rabbi Moshe Berlove, one of our longstanding members at Gulf Manor Synagogue, a tremendous learned rabbi with amazing experience, who's going to share with us some of what he has gathered regarding the history of Mechiras Chometz, of the sale of Chometz. I also want to thank Achihud Cox, our dear friend who's now in Eretz Yisrael, for helping arrange this Torah series, along with many other Torah series that we did together with Mechon Meir previously. And with no further ado, Rabbi Berlove.
Thank you for the kind introduction that learned, but this is a very interesting topic to me, because even if one examines just the here and now, synchronically, in other words, what the takes are in the halakhic community about Mechiras Chometz, it's not completely unanimous in how it's viewed and under what circumstances it is kedai, it is inappropriate to use the Mechiras Chometz, or on another level, what circumstances is it necessary. It would seem that from the earliest origins of Mechiras Chometz, that we'll go into soon in a little bit more detail, to the present time, things have changed tremendously from an occasional sale to something that all Jews are almost expected to take part in. And I believe that I have room to say that the change didn't even stop necessarily in perception, let's say a generation ago or a couple of decades ago. And my proof for that is from a question, I don't believe that I would even call it a shiloh. Shiloh usually means that there is a very serious question of Jewish law that could be viewed in more than one way, could be decided in more than one way, or at least analyzed from several different directions. But there was a question that while I was with Rabbi Sharfstein, the Zichrono Livracha, I went to his house before Pesach. Rabbi Sharfstein was the Rav of the city of Cincinnati for many, many decades, basically almost the time that the very famous Rav, Rabbi Eliezer Silver, was nifter, had passed away. Rabbi Sharfstein kind of took over the mantle. He was a member of Chabad, but not from that part of Chabad that goes in a very different direction from the Jewish community, but very much rooted in the Jewish community as a whole. He was a person who had shibush. He had practice in becoming a Rav from the Lubavitcher Rav, not to be confused with Lubavitcher Rebbe. I'm speaking about Rav Dworkin, Salman Shimon, I think, was in Dworkin, and he also lived in the Berlove side growing up in the same building as Rav Moshe Feinstein. So we had quite a connection with Rav Moshe Feinstein. And in fact, when Cincinnati appointed him as Rav, I didn't know this until he passed it around at his shloshim, which actually shows him that the community here wrote to Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe wrote back, "You did a very good thing. I'm giving you my stamp of approval because I know Rav Sharfstein well for 20 years, and it's certainly a very good choice in appointing him as your Rav." In any case, the question came in by phone to Rabbi Sharfstein, very to me, a very simple question, almost nonsensical. The person says, I don't have any chometz. Could have been a single person, whatever. I don't have any chometz, do I have to sell it? So Rabbi Shabtai kind of laughed. Of course not. If you have chometz, you know what to do with it, so you have to sell it. You don't have chometz, you don't have to sell it. I think that's obvious. So that was maybe around 1990. More recently, I saw, and I cannot remember who it was, but a big voice store. It might have been, I'm tending to think it was Rabbi Orbach. I'm not 100% sure. And I don't know the date of this. One of the biggest poskim of our Shman was asked the same question. And his answer was, well, for you to go out of your way and sell it, it's not necessary. But if you're in a place where everybody's going to the local rabbi to arrange for Mechiras Chometz, so go also. How much of a tircha, how much of a burden is it on you to just insult and Marv and the others do a little, you raise your hand with a handkerchief and you sign, so you do it also. In other words, it was to die, and he didn't laugh it off. So it seems like Mechiras Chometz, in the sense that it's done nowadays in the formal sense, seems to be more and more expected as a norm that every Jew is expected to do. And then when I've told people that if they don't have chometz, they don't need to sell, they've argued, but we have the chometz kalim, we have the equipment, and then I've said that that there is no obligation, this is luckily 100% true, to sell chometz kalim. And someone wants to say something, make sure it's thoroughly clean. That's a very good thing, but even if you didn't make sure it's thoroughly clean, there's a tiny bit of residue. It's not a kazayas, you're putting it away, you're not going to attempt to eat it. It's a Moshe, unless it's a kazayas. There is no obligation to sell your equipment on Pesach. It was never done, as we'll see in a moment, because they didn't have such a sale as a matter of course. Nowadays, if you look at the various stores of Mechiras Chometz, they generally differ powerfully in this point. The ones that I've seen, either they say after Rabbi Shabtai's star, which I believe he co-opted from his predecessor, Rabbi Silver, did say in the various things that were included under the Mechira, it included the kalim. I used to cross it out, which I said you can do. A number of the people from a more yeshivish background here who joined the community had a question.
He's not that loud.
Was if you sell your kalim, then arguably if it's a real sale, and then you reacquire them after Pesach, right? You question of Tevila, don't you have to put them in the mikveh? Like any new keli or any keli that had belonged to a goy, and you're co-opting for Jewish use. So I've seen that as it might be the discrepancy between what he says in the text and what he says in the sample stock. So some of the scholars say that it includes the kalim, with the exception of those kalim that normally have to be totaled. Get out of that problem. Some scholars say that. Otherwise, some of the scholars I think have also seen, maybe not in the star, but in instructions that say you sell the beliyah, the amount of the various residue or taste of chometz that has been absorbed. Again, I want to emphasize that 100% is not a necessity. People owned food equipment, dishes, and so on, since the time the Torah has been given.
Rabbi Berlove, can I ask you about, you quoted, I think it was Shlomo Zalman Auerbach or one
Yeah,
of his.
I'm not sure if that was him. I don't.
Okay, whoever.
I think it was. Yeah.
Do you happen to know what his reasoning was? Was it kind of like this is the nahug, or was his reasoning a concern of the possibility that you might have chometz and not be aware of it, and this will protect you in that event?
If my memory serves me right, was in one of these books, which people have different take on, conversations with,
I see.
generally speaking, the people, are generally very careful to report the conversation accurately, but it's not the same thing. They don't go into details of these conversations. So that would include it, unfortunately. I probably could, or make it obvious, tell which way I'm going in terms of how I value these various things. However, it's very, very clear that Mesilas Chometz was not a normal part of what a Jew did prior to Pesach. We find in the Gemara in Chometz Tosefta, Tosefta means that it comes from the Tanoim, right? The same rabbis who are recorded in the Mishnah, but various other things that are versions of their Torah which were not included in the Mishnah and don't have quite the same weight, but they're very important. Two are quoted in the Gemara, but I lost my thought for the moment. That in many cases it's for Tanoim that they quote a Maisa about a Jew and a Goy who would be traveling by ship just as Pesach is about to begin. The Erev Pesach and the Zman for Chometz is about to come. There are actually instances of what had happened, but in the Pesach it's fairly quoted as a din. So the Jew owns Chometz. So then, although the Chometz that he owns is presumably at home, it's not with him in the physical sense where he's in the ship. Nevertheless, he can sell it and tell the Goy. The lashon there is Nosam Matorah, which we would normally translate gives him as a present, but I don't believe that's what it means. It means that, in other words, the Chometz would be the Goy's. It's not just a formal sale, but the Goy would actually be owning completely and have access to the Chometz from Pesach. And then this is the Chiddush. This is the new part of it, that he can go and rebuy it after Pesach. Actually, I started from step 2. Historically, I should have mentioned step 1, that you have a Machlokes Mishnah between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, how long in the day, an Erev Pesach, are you allowed to, how late in the day are you allowed to sell Chometz to a Goy? And according to Beis Shammai, there has to be enough time that the Goy could eat it at least before Pesach. So Beis Hillel says that's not necessary. There is a similar machlokes, very analogous on Erev Shabbos and Friday. How late can you sell something to a Goy? Between the fact that the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel doesn't seem to presuppose any standard procedure of selling, and then the later Tanoim, it was a question of when they're on a ship. So how often does that happen? That a person is traveling on a ship just exactly on Erev Pesach, and oof, I've got Chometz at home. So okay, so they permitted to sell it even though the Chometz was not right there. And the Tosefta says that the Jew may buy it back after Pesach. So that's already one step closer to what we're used to. However, it's very clear, it has to be clearly stipulated that it is Matana Gemura. Again, the person today translating those words, Matana Gemura, might just mechanically say it has to be an absolute gift because of the use that the word Matana has taken on over the centuries. But the Matana Gemura that the Tosefta refers to, I'm sure it means that the Goy has to be in complete legal possession of the Chometz, not somehow just a custodian. That we use the example quite as clear, but on the first day of Sukkot, your Arba Minim, your Lulav Esrog, etc., have to be your own, lachem. You don't have your own, so you can get them, but matana gemura. The point of the word matana is not so much it's a gift as it is a gift in the sense, but the point is that it transfers ownership completely at that point. Any case, this is an unusual situation. Then there's a second din that follows in the same Tosefta, that a Jew could tell the guy who's buying Chometz on Erev Pesach. There's a couple of different interpretations of this, but one interpretation at least, which is Rabbi Manoach, is that since they were traveling on the ship, it's continuing in the same scenario. The Jew was worried that once Pesach ends, he may not have chametz to eat. So he tells the guy, you're going to the store now, and you only need for your own needs $100 worth of chametz. You buy 200 for yourself, and then I'll buy some of it for myself from you after Pesach. That is also acceptable. In any case, there is a little bit of a question that involves the girsa, the exact textual reading of the first part of the Tosefta. When we quoted the part of the Tosefta that says that the Jew and Goy who are at the ship, the Jew can sell the Chometz to the Goy and then buy back after Pesach. In the Bahaga, the Halachas Gedolos, very early Gaonic source, and certain other early sources, there are three more words that do not appear in all versions, and there are three very crucial words. Uvilvad shelo ya'arim. So this only is permitted on condition that he doesn't make a trick. So what is making a trick? So one of the early commentaries or Perushim on this would be of Aaron Gong, and another Perush which is attributed to the Ritva, may not authentically be the Ritva. He says, Uvilvad shelo ya'arim, providing he doesn't make what we call a ha'arama, a trick, means that he doesn't make a habit of doing this year in and year out. As these Rishonim say, quote, Aval imherim v'rogel la'aseit kain v'chol shonim limkol l'goy karam ha'pesach kansinilei. If he does this year in and year out, that he sells a goy his labbits that he didn't get to dispose of before Pesach with the idea of buying it back, we penalize him that even though this works in principle, that we do not permit this to happen because it becomes like a joke. So that would be an absolute contradiction to our practice. And there is an actual question among some of the later Rishonim whether the three questionable words, that he may not make a trick, is that, in the view of some of the early Rishonim, part of the Tosefta? The Tosefta already says this only works leniently if he does not do this habitually. Or is this an addition that one of the Rishonim, in quoting the Tosefta, but he also added on his own, whether it was the Halachas Gedolos or someone else, that he should not make the trick. So that's very, very crucial. Nevertheless, the Beis Yosef, who feels that the extra words are not part of the Tosefta itself, says it makes no sense to put in that stipulation because the whole thing of transferring ownership to the goy and then reacquiring it, as the Beis Yosef says, Ein l'cha harama gedola mizu. There is no trick which is greater than that. It's obviously a trick, says the Beis Yosef. Nevertheless, it is permitted, but it is permitted since the Chometz is not going to be, owned by the Jew at all. And this is a big problem in a sense, because there is usually a principle that Ma'arimim b'Derabanan, but we're not lo Ma'arimim b'Doraisa. That we are allow some sort of a trick when it comes to a rabbinic rule, but not when it comes to a rule from the Torah. So some want to say, notes, see now, that in actual fact, is anyone blue papers there? Thank you. Some want to say that in this case, there's actually, thank you, it's a rabbinic point, because we do bittul chometz, so the chometz that you sell is only required to be sold as an extra rabbinic hachmara, stringency. Others would say that which you sell is excluded from your bittul, so we still have the oraisa question, and they get around it in several different ways. In any case, it looks like as things developed, that this scenario of the Tosefta, which only applied in unusual circumstances, such as an Erev Pesach trip, became the basis for another step in the process. And others would explain, in fact, some explained, that why did the Tosefta have to give a scenario of the ship trip if it applies under more usual circumstances? And they might explain that was simply a usual scenario where you would have that need, but doesn't exclude other times as well. Most of the time, people bought food a little bit at a time, and short or absent unusual circumstances, there wouldn't be a problem that would require some kind of a mechiras chometz. It's interesting, by the time of the tour, I believe, was just into the 14th century, 1300s. When he mentions the idea of selling chometz to a goy, he doesn't talk about any unusual circumstances like the ship. However, and the Shulchan Aruch neither. Nevertheless, the Shulchan Aruch phrases it as follows. He says, "Mecharai anasanai alafri mechutz labayis." If he sold it, if he gave it to a guy outside the house, which seems to imply strongly that the chometz needs to be out of the Jew's house, even though the Jew knows the guy and knows that the guy is playing along with it, so to speak, and will not actually be touching the chometz during Pesach, but keep it for the Jew. It's still allowed as long as it corrects a transfer. So it's a complete machil. So the Moadim B'Halacha, which is the basis of my share today, he asks the following, or he asks in order to explain how times changed. Going back to the times of the Shulchan Aruch, when the assumption is again can be done as a regular thing, but the chometz actually was moved to the goy's house. What kind of chometz was it? Let's analyze. Grain. Even if you don't watch the grain, then it shouldn't become chometz. It's not chometz. Today, if you want to process grain into flour and you want to use a process which involves immersion in water, then you have a problem. Classically, this was not done. And in fact, so much so that it's wild for anybody to calculate today, but it says in Gemara Pesachim, B'seikos shel nachri mamala adam Grace of Ahem Avati Yochal Kazayas Matzah, the word Kazayas Matzah, that at the Seder night, you can take unleavened bread that a goy has made, assuming obviously it had to be made under conditions that it would not be chometz, and you're allowed to eat it. We mean that the goy had shmur matzahs, the goy had flour or grain that had been washed from before. You're allowed to eat as long as you're not yaitze the mitzvah with that bread, and you make sure, let's say, by your afikomen, to eat Jewish baked matzah, or even more so, basic, even in Shulchan Aruch times. And this was done maybe in the Soviet Union. It says that while it's true that the matzah we eat for the mitzvah required shimur, required some sort of washing, there is a machlokas, of at least three opinions of when the washing has to start. The washing has to start from the time you cut it, which is our shmur matzah. Does the washing have to start from the time you mill it into flour, which our regular Pesach matzahs follow, or does it have to start from the time when you need the dough? And they say, b'shas hachak, extenuating circumstances, you go out to the store, regular goyish store, you buy regular flour, and you can make matzah out of it, the same matzah, and put it in your Seder plate. I'm told they did do that in the Soviet Union for the matzah, which the authorities sporadically, begrudgingly allowed certain showcase communities like in Moscow to bake. And then I think I heard that afterwards, as things opened up, well, the rabbis relied on this din, extenuating circumstances to use that because they couldn't actually have shmur flour. But when things opened up in the Soviet Union, came out, all the flour in the Soviet Union is processed with water. So unfortunately, that matzah was chometz. But nevertheless, we see that grain and even flour, in principle, is not chometz. So again, what kind of chometz would they have? Bread, wafers, maybe small amounts of liquor or something. There could be grain, which in some cases that did become chometz. So these things were small enough in quantity that they could be readily transportable. That's why Klal Yisrael was able to withstand a situation even in the medieval times, where while the mechiras chametz became much more common, not only under extenuating circumstances, but the chametz itself had to be physically transported to the goy's possession. Then something happened. There were large places, the amount of places in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, where somehow Jews had the monopoly on the liquor market at various levels, whether manufacture, wholesale, retail. I mean, it was a whole thing that they generally, I know how it was under the Tsar, I don't know how it was before or other forms of government, that there was a special license that in every locale, one person would get the liquor license. And generally went to the highest bidder, and very often it was less a matter of paying, a particular set fee as it was a bribe, who would give the biggest bribe. But if that was a system. And so what are they supposed to do on Pesach? And can they transport all the contents of their liquor factory to the goy? That would not be very feasible. And the Bach of Yale Search, don't remember if he was still the 1500s or into the 1600s. He says that he was in Poland, and in our country, that he uses the words rov masa umatan, as majority of business. Because it was a huge business for Jews, who behind Saraf was with liquor, sometimes manufactured, others sold. And it's impossible to obviously physically move all of it for Pesach, especially those that have that where they have that system of license, exclusive. So it can be permitted to sell the goy all the chometz that is in the room where it is the business is conducted. And he goes on, though, that the room itself should be sold to the goy. And he talks about what kinyonim, what physical acts will count in order to transfer the room to a goy. So the Taz of the Magen Avraham, was who was the son-in-law of the Bach? Was that the Taz?
Mhm.
Right. So they were certainly into the 1600s. They supported this leniency of the Bach to keep the Chometz in place. And they went to prove from various proofs in the Gemara that even according to the din of the Gemara, it would not be necessary to actually move the Chometz. Then we had a side problem with what goy would be willing to lay out enough cash to pay for, an entire liquor store or liquor manufacturing plant, even distillery, even in the scale they had then, so they would basically start with a down payment and some kind of a milestone, some kind of a security, and this also had its own set of halachas. And then at a certain point, when it looked like things were becoming too routine, it looked too much like a real trick, it started with the idea of a star mechira. I don't think he gives the exact time, but they were certainly doing it by the 18th century. Star mechira means that an actual document of sale. As a halachic problem, those who have learned become a Metzia, a star works for what? A bill of sale works for karka, for land and certain other things, but not for normal metaltalin. So here we have several reasons why we do a star mechira, and which seems to be like very, very central to today's mechiras chometz. We do a star mechira, notwithstanding that it probably does not help with metaltalin. One reason, first of all, I should say I didn't find this in my research today, but it's a known fact that there's some halachic dispute as to what the laws of kinyonim are between Jew and Goy. But the answers to this particular point would be that maybe the star mechira doesn't help because of the reason we said. And yet, we try to do everything we can to avoid the appearance that our mechiras chometz is a trick or a joke, formality. So we make a very elaborate, formal bill of sale. Others will point out that we still have to be makna, to transfer right to the goy for the place where the chometz is located. Maybe Rabbi Al could correct me if I'm wrong. I think the way I start to word it is today not so much that they own the place, but they own rights of entry or something, no?
There are different rabbanim have different languages that they use, but it's usually it's a rental, and whether he has total rights or partial rights, that's
Right, that's disputed. That's
Right.
different concepts. Then we have a concept that rental is in many ways schiras, like a kinyan damya, that a rental is halachically equivalent in many ways to ownership. And so if the kinyan of the document works as a formal kinyan, for those that don't know the back, kinyan is the formal act that we need to do to transfer ownership of things. If that's a kinyan would work for the actual space for the because it's called karka. So then there's what we call agav. Sometimes you can have a kinyan which works for your basic thing that you're selling, but ancillary to that, or like on the back of that, so to speak, you pile up other sales of other things that on their own would not work with the rules of this kinyan, but since they are ancillary or secondary to the first kinyan, which does work, in this case, the rights to the property, so it works for those things too. There's a third thing possible operating here, the concept of dina de malchusa dina. And when it comes at least to monetary things, the law of the land applies to us as well. So that's a topic that many days of shiurim could be given on. What are the parameters of that rule? However, based on that rule, there would be certainly an advantage to make this star legitimate or the sale legitimate according to the rules of the country. So a document would help for that. I should perhaps use this as a starting point for the topic that there are various takes on how legitimate from a legal, non-Jewish law point of view the sale needs to be or is. I'm going to say something which is absolutely non-PC, but it's historically true, that I believe it's in Mortem Ismanim or something I saw, or more likely Shuzan Huggis of Sternbuch, as we know, for a period of time, split its time between Eretz Yisrael and South Africa. And as painful as it is for today's people to contemplate, the facts were for the longest time, South Africa had a system called apartheid, where the races were kept separate. And it was not permissible for a white to sell land in a white area to a black. Not that we're approving of this at any level, we're a society, but that was the law. So normally, when rabbis do the communal sale of Chometz, they typically use the janitor, the custodian, or someone of that nature, who typically would have been a black. And as part of that sale, as we just said, is the rights to either enter or possibly in some in some versions, it's actually the ownership of where the Chometz is. So if it doesn't work according to the Dida de Malchusa, you can't sell a black land in the white area. So how that work? If Sternberg answers, it would work. It's okay, because the point of this mechira is not that it's a regular sale from the government point of view, and it's a sale to get out of the halachic prohibition of owning Chometz in Pesach. And surely the Goyim would not have a problem with that type of interracial sale. When I read this, I was shocked because the rabbis that I saw always, whose instructors we grew up with, always emphasized time and again, it's a real sale, should not be seen as a trick. In fact, there was a case in 100, 200 years ago, the Baruch Frankel from a city called Leipzig, somewhere in Europe, Rabbi Sternbuch brings down, that it was in Moravia, trying to check the public now, that the Goyim were doing the sale to the Jews without filling out the proper documents in court, which would bring out the obligation of paying tax. So they answered the same thing, that basically the non-Jewish government would not look at this as a real sale. They don't have, according to them, a concept of a sale that is set up and just for the purpose of getting out of a prohibition, but they understand it's a religious ritual, and as such, they wouldn't expect to have any sales tax. And then as a related question, some recommend highly that the Mechiras Chometz document should be given over not only in Hebrew, but also in the language of the land, so that the goy could understand it, so it looks legitimate. And yet there's some who argue, so it's not clear that it's good or it's not good. In any case, since we're about to conclude, I would like to bring this up to what seemed to be the more usual or the more contemporary stage. It seems that somewhere between 1800 and 1850, very broadly, and the exact time would depend on the exact place, it became a standard thing that the rabbi would do it. Because a lot of people, even though they were doing it individually as a routine thing, they might goof up, right? The rabbis were instituted as a general thing. There were those in Romania who very much objected to it and found another generation of Jews in Romania. It looks like, according to Rabbi Zevin in Lithuania, Belarus, where most of the Litvaks come from, it was not a problem. There was no opposition. But here too, there's something very interesting. That I know that when we were given the instructions about Berlove Chometz by shul rabbis and so on, the rabbis would emphasize, no, you're not selling the Chometz to the rabbi. You're selling it to a guy through the rabbi. The rabbi or his basin are only an agent. It turns out, when in the earlier to mid 1800s, the yearly sale of Chometz was changed from an individual sale to a sale that the rabbi did for the whole community. There were two ways within that. There were communities in Big Rabbanim where the idea was that every Jew who wants to sell his Chometz to the rabbi, actually. The rabbi would turn around and sell it to the goy. And of course, the way that has become the universally accepted way is that we sell it to the goy only via the agency of the rabbi and his beis din. This is the last thing. People have sometimes the murky idea of you sell bread, you sell cake, you sell loose, you sell this, you sell that. So the answer is, according to most authorities, Mechiras Chometz, Chometz means Chometz. It doesn't mean something that has kitnios in it, and legumes which don't have to be sold at all. Many will say it doesn't apply to cosmetics, even for those who are strict not to use any cosmetic if there's a chance that it contains something which is Chometz derived. But it's still, for various reasons, in terms of the proportion in it, in terms of the edibility, is not something we would transgress if we kept over Pesach. Mechiras Chometz means Chometz. So, generally speaking, there are many Rabbanim who recommend that it would be nice to not rely on this Mechira for actual Chometz. So that one would sell the cosmetics and the mixed ingredient things that have a little bit of Chometz in it, as opposed to actual bread and cake and crackers, some cereals. And that's a very good hidur, a very good strictness to be beyond the letter of the law. But for those who do sell real Chometz, and I can tell you from experience that I've had that in some homes, in some families, there can be a lot of shalom bayis problems when every bit of Chometz, and people usually have lots of food in their house ahead of time the whole year, it has to be sold or else. And then there can be arguments between a husband and wife. Why didn't you get rid of it? Why didn't you eat more? Why did you buy too much? That sometimes shalom bayis, this is my own very strong belief, can vote in favor of selling actual Chometz. Those who are able to have a peaceful Pesach at home and not sell their actual Chometz, tavo aleim bracha. It's a very good stringency, but it should not be confused with the letter of the law. May we continue to have a Chag Kosher V'Sameach.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi Berlove. Once again, I want to wish everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach.